Doing this live. Boom. What's going on, guys? Rome the Roamer here. I'm here with three of the smartest sellers I know, and I'm here with the actual smartest seller as well. I'll give a quick intro to everyone. Hopefully my Wi-Fi is not too bad. I'm here in Columbia. I think it might be better than Fields of Profit. He's in the middle of Michigan right now, so we'll see. But I'll start from left to right. We got Fields of Profit. He's a young kid just starting out. And he's learned so fast. He's doing 6 figures plus a month. What are your what's your annual sales right now? 12-month sales?
About 1.3 million. I've been doing this since 2018. You're making me sound like a rookie.
Well, I don't know. You showed up to Miami, and it seemed like you were still selling books back then, right? Or is that when you first transitioned?
Yep.
Okay.
That was like that's when I was around switching. Yeah.
Gotcha. Anyway, you're young. I'm young. These other two guys are a little bit older. We got Scott Needham. I believe he did 70 million last year at an 18% margin.
No, not quite. 45, 50. But who's counting,
Okay.
right?
If you include Smart Scout sales, it's probably 70 million. And Scott has helped me tremendously this summer. I started using what he talked about at Miami 2022, which is pricing up at night. I changed to ChannelMax actually to reprice. And I actually have a lot of questions for you on why my sales doubled, because it doesn't really make sense why they doubled, because my pricing rules didn't change that much. But I started pricing up at night, and I raised my minimum price from $7, which is actually losing money for me in my business because I run a consignment business. So if I make $1, I'm paying 50 cents out. And so I was actually losing money at $7. So I raised my minimum price to $10. I started pricing up at night, and I doubled my units sold, and I 1.5x'd my sales volume. And I believe a lot of that was due to pricing up at night, but also a lot of it was just due to changing to ChannelMax. So I'd be curious your thoughts on why that happened when my core pricing rule is still match buy box, and why am I seeing that type of increase in sales? And then we got Caleb, my mentor, who taught me everything about selling books. Met him several years ago, 4 years ago now. Is that how long it was?
It's been a hot second. Yep.
Yeah, it's been a hot second. And he has really shifted the thinking in the book selling space to pricing up when it comes to FBA. So, for example, if you have a $100 textbook and the lowest FBA offer is 101, and the person only has 2 units in stock and it's about to be August, you know they're going to sell out, and you can price up maybe at 120, 130, and you can make an extra $20, $30 profit. And I've used this technique several times, so I'm curious to have Caleb and Scott together. And Caleb kind of talks more about this on a micro scale for people doing, 1,000 to 10,000 a month, but he helps them make a lot higher profit margins with the Amazon FBA bump. And I'm curious if Scott also uses any of the FBA bump, and then vice versa. Scott talked about pricing up at night, and I'm curious to see what Caleb's thoughts are on pricing up in the book selling space. Scott talks a lot about fast repricers. I'm curious what Caleb's thoughts are on, because I've heard Caleb say it's not important to reprice fast. So I'm curious to have you two hash it out and see how important it actually is for booksellers to reprice fast. And I got Warner here to help ask questions that I don't ask because he's also smart as hell. So yeah, let's dive into this, guys. My first question is for Caleb, I believe. Let's take a step back.
Can I just make I feel like a lawyer here. Can I just make a fine print comment before we jump in?
I knew you were going to give some type of disclaimer. What's going on?
That's the word. So I will just hands up and just say, look, I am not an expert when it comes to repricing. And I would say the book world is very different than the regular online arbitrage and regular item. We are typically dealing with one-off quantities. And so it's not always about maximizing sell-through. We'll talk about it. I think pricing is really just, it's a lot of it's personal preference. Some of it,
yes.
There's a lot of business, it's not there's a one size fits all or one decision's better than another. It's really about balancing what you're after. And I'll talk about this as we get into it. For me, it's more about balancing your sell-through rate, so how quickly you sell your inventory, and then trying to balance that ASP or the average selling price. And those typically they're inversely related. So you can keep a really, really high average selling price at the detriment of not selling very much inventory, which as restock limits kick in, as we got the announcement yesterday, that can be a challenge. But we'll get into all that in a little bit, and I'm curious where you want to take the conversation. But the disclaimer is I'm not an expert when it comes to repricing. I know some things that work in my business and from talking to others, and I'm probably just as curious as you are from a larger seller. And Scott, I know you're very data driven as well. So I'm going to be just as much of a participant as a panelist.
I do want to make. Go ahead, Scott.
I was just gonna reiterate, like, I think Caleb was totally right. Like, similar question is like everyone's gonna ask like, well, what's the best repricer? And I don't think it matters as much because there's like trade-offs. For example, like ChannelMax, that's what I've used for 10 years. I've tried other things. It's very configurable, but it's not super user friendly. You know, it's, you go in there and you kind of have to learn a lot. And then like books, actually a lot of repricers started from like, you know, when books were the only thing that resellers were doing. And they are very different than our world, because like actually in books, like used products really become a very competitive space where like if you're in, you know, consumer goods, like used products are kind of like no one really thinks about them and takes them as seriously. So, you know, a lot of the ideas that I think we'll talk about, like, will apply to some people in certain situations, and then others, like, not so much.
Perfect.
And one more thing I want to preface this with, I won't say the name of the company, but people in the book space know of a company that will utilize the FBA bump at scale. So I do think that this conversation is relevant. And I would also, after Caleb's answer, I would like to hear Scott's answer on what he thinks about on leveraging the FBA bump. So Caleb will talk a little bit more about that. But Caleb, if you want to talk about the trends that you've seen, I've seen you write blog post about this, and you've looked at sellers larger than yourself, all their inventory, and what you've noticed in terms of the FBA prime bump. You give people advice on a very small scale, looking at keepographs and seasonality, and that's not really the prime bump so much. But if you want to talk about the FBA prime bump and how it's made sellers more money by leveraging that.
Yeah, so the prime bump is essentially what's the differential between what will somebody buy your prime book for if you're fulfilled by Amazon versus what the lowest market used price is, which is typically merchant fulfilled seller. So that is the bump. And we've done a number of like statistical analysis based on it. I've got a brother who's a PhD in mathematics, a brother who's a PhD in computer science. And
is your brother Scott?
Say it again.
Is your brother Scott?
Could be. But let's just say I leverage them a bit more so. I don't know what they get out of it other than just they get to nerd out. So we played around with it. In general, people will pay more for Prime. And Scott, I don't know how other categories work, but typically the buy box in books goes to the lowest Prime offer from a reputable seller. So somebody that has enough feedback, has buy box eligibility. Sometimes Amazon will hide or suppress the buy box if they determine that the price is too high. But in general, if you want to see what this is, go to like bring up any book page, go to the book, and you'll see, buy new, typically from Amazon, sometimes a third-party seller. That'll be like the orange button in the top right corner. It looks a little different on mobile. Then they'll have a buy used, and that is what we call the used buy box. That is typically the lowest prime price. So the scouting apps like Scout IQ, got it right here in the background, of course. And side note, Scott, your app is called Smart Scout or Scout Smart? I forget which one.
Smart Scout.
Smart Scout. When we were originally coming up with Scout IQ, we were going to call it Scout Smart. So I think the inverse of you. So it's kind of funny how that all integrated. We ended up with IQ, and then that was kind of the trendy thing in software for a while, but so be it. So the prime bump is what somebody's willing to pay to get that book. In some markets, same day, some markets 1 day, some markets 2 day. And in general, that prime bump is between $3 to $5. And of course it fluctuates. We can get into the science behind it. In general, the higher the merchant fulfilled price is, the higher that bump is going to be, both as a percentage and a dollar value. And that makes sense. You just want to put yourself in the buyer's shoes. If a book is merchant fulfilled for $8, including shipping, and the lowest prime price is 30, is someone really going to pay $30 to get that book in a day or two? That's 3 to 4x times the price of the lowest used price. And so that $20 to $25 prime bump doesn't really make sense. Now, one buyer in 100 might do it. And so someone will say, well, Caleb says don't give this much of a prime bump, but I just sold a book yesterday that did it. Sure, there's always going to be outliers. What we're trying to do is build a good strategy. Now, a $100 textbook, to your point earlier, Avery, and someone asking for 125 prime, that's not that much of a differential. It's 25% bump. $25 over 100 doesn't feel nearly as egregious as $25 over 8. And so what we tend to see is the higher the used price of the book in general, the higher that bump can be. So it tends to be more of a sliding scale. But that's what the bump is. We don't always see it on books. Sometimes prime sellers are competing just as much as merchant fulfilled and just trying to sell that book as quickly as possible. And so sometimes that bump goes away. But on average, we kind of see like a median prime bump in the $3.50 to $5.50 range.
Yeah, I think you'll find a lot of people are not taking advantage of the prime bump, ourselves included. And in just regular consumer products where like, because repricers don't always factor that in. They may be like buy box or death. Like they want the buy box and that's what they're going to get. And a lot of times it is an FBM offer will win the buy box with like, you know, $1, $1.50 lower price, when you actually can still have a higher differential. You can have like a a product that's $4 more expensive, and people still select your product. And so, you know, be careful that like, you know, repricers, they have their, you know, their algorithm and their mission, and that's what they're going for. There can be a lot of smart logic. I've seen repricers do smart things, but I personally feel that kind of the guardrails that you give your repricer are as important. Like, what's your minimum margin that you want? Like, do you really want to like sell products at break even? Do you want to sell like just to get your inventory back, or are you willing to wait, you know, 5, 10, 15 days to get a margin that, you know, really makes you a lot happier? So that's you know, that's a little bit of our setup, is that we continually set the floors and ceilings to our repricer to what we think is, you know, the best you know, range, and that is insisting on a minimum margin. When we did that, because everything that we do is prime, just by insisting on the minimum margin, like our gross margins just like went up like overnight when we did that. So yeah, if you've got prime products, you don't just go after the buy box at all cost. Understand that like there's just different situations, and yeah.
So Scott, follow-up question there.
Yeah. So
Lots of questions.
Yeah, we're just going to go. In the non-book world, do you see that the buy box typically gets awarded to a prime offer, or is it less selective of prime offers?
Yeah, it's generally a prime offer, and there can be on some ASINs, it can be very weighted to, you know, a bigger seller, as it's understood that the buy box is basically, you know, in their mind, they're trying to calculate what's the best customer experience. Well, someone that successfully has sold a product 1,000 times versus someone that successfully sold it 5 times, they're going to like, you know, we've seen it where it's been in our favor, and where it's been in someone else's favor. But then there's some times where it's equal, and then it just rotates between FBA sellers. But for an FBM offer to win, they generally need to beat it by, you know, 3 to 5% before they can even be considered.
Got it.
You also mentioned,
Go ahead, Warren. Yeah.
Sometimes there's like, sometimes you mentioned there's like a difference you can test between, like some items you can go $1.50 more expensive, some items you can go $4 more expensive, and you're still getting just as much buy box. Are you actually like, do you have something in place to test that? Like you're just, you know, you're got the wheels turning there, like trying to maximize that profit, seeing the max price as an FBA seller, you could get it over the FBM guys.
So right now we're not basing it off of buy box percentage, but actually our sell through. So we put it at a price, a minimum margin or whatever. If it sells, I don't care what the buy box says. Like we're just gonna like let it continue. Then if it doesn't sell over 5 days, 10 days, 20 days, we actually start to decrease our minimum expected margin, our floors that we send the repricer. And then on the flip side, if it starts selling really well, and we can predict our stock out date, This is for situations where, you have dozens of units. Then you start to just price back up. So we actually have, my overall philosophy is that your first days in stock and your last days in stock should be your most profitable.
Yeah, that's really interesting you say that, because with books, you only have to get the sale like one time, so you can be a little bit more conservative in your pricing, because even if you get, I don't know what it's called, but like that side buy box thing, or not even buy box at all, but you know what I'm talking about? Like there's the buy box, but then there's like the 3 next offers here. Like if you're the first prime offer there and buy box is MF, they're going to see the expected shipping dates like 14 days away versus a prime check here that they're paying $100 a year for that prime membership. And, I've sold a book for $1,000 more in the low MF price. It was $1,000, $1,300 Jewish set. And actually I sold it for $2,000, so $700 more. But, people want their stuff fast. But if I had like 20 of those items in stock or 200, my strategy probably would have been different,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, maybe that affects its skill. Right before we move on, I got one more question for Caleb. Without mentioning the name of that software that does compare against the lowest 5 or not, maybe even more than that, prime offers, do you know specifically at scale if any seller has substantially increased their margin by conservatively pricing against other prime offers, or do you not know? Have you not looked at that data yet?
Anecdotally, yes. So I think when it comes to books, I don't know if you can reprice this way with other products, but books, because we just have one typically, you're trying to just get one sale. And so if I'm trying to get the next sale on a book that's selling every day, like a high eScore product, low sales rank product, then it might be foolish of me just to try and get that sale in a week or in a couple of days, because if that price is going to fluctuate, then I'm okay kind of setting it a little bit higher and just waiting for the market dynamics to allow that price to get back to where I want it to be. So I think as a bookseller, you kind of have 2 strategies. One is kind of set it and let the market come to you. And the other is just chase buy box, or kind of automated repricing, where it's kind of continuously around the clock. And I see pros and cons either way. If you're willing to set it and wait, you're definitely going to protect margin. So to Scott's point, and you like we always talk about feed the beast, and you're going to make money as you put more books in. But if you can squeeze more profit and not impact your sell-through rate that much, because I could list every book I have at $100, and I'm going to sell some of them like textbooks, and some books will eventually kind of spike up, and out of print books might get that. But my sell-through rate is going to drop like through the floor to the point where I can't really run an effective business.
What's that story of that book you sold for like $2,000 or something, and it was not a $2,000 book, and you had to like cancel the order? Like you experimented with like pricing.
Yeah, I was trying to monitor like some of the SQS, like real-time notifications, and one of the ways to do that is to just have a listing. It was a dummy listing for like $2,000 or $10,000. It was some stupid number where no one in their right mind should buy the book, and I guess they did. So it was either a test order or I got the buy box somehow. I don't really know, but if you play at scale with Amazon, you're going to see really weird outliers and anomalies.
100%. Okay, so the next topic we're going to talk about, I want Scott to start, is why should we price up? When should we price up? And what have you seen in your business by pricing up? And the next question is, should booksellers price up as well?
It's obviously a question that you answer, depending on your situation. But I do think you should always be thinking about, how can I price up? When can I do it? Like, repricers, they generally want to go down because they want to beat someone else by a penny. I've seen that where like all day long, people go down by a penny and against each other. So what we have done is, between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m., we just price up because of those other people that are using aggressive repricers. You give them a chance, and by the end of that period, maybe the market's moved up $1.50, and then you go back to that war. Then another situation is we actually, during the middle of the day, we'll just price up for 30 minutes just to do it. I don't have a lot of, I haven't like researched a ton of data on it. I just want to keep finding reasons to do it. And I bet you there's a few situations that I'm not considering. One that I actually tested 3 weeks ago was we had a product that the market just like went, we were selling it at $30 and the market just went down to like 19. And that was like losing a lot of money for us. But we also wanted to like test some things out. I wanted to sell through. So we actually priced low. We were losing money on that sale, but we actually would yo-yo it back up and we would get a handful of sales at that elevated price. A lot of times people add something to their cart, they come back later, and yeah, maybe there's a notification that the price went up, but they just don't think about it. And so you can, you can do some yo-yo tactics. So I would say that's kind of like a Hail Mary if you're going up against Amazon to eke out a few sales here or there. Definitely not a strategy that works when you only have one, but so when you have 1,000 and you're ready for them to start moving, doing stuff like that can work.
Yeah. It would only work if you had one, if you could price up and maintain buy box, which it doesn't sound like that's happening. It sounds like they're just going back to the cart and purchasing again. When did you start doing that 30 minutes pricing up in the middle of the day?
I've done it since the beginning. I've been doing it for years. It's just kind of just at
Miami 2022, you said that you started pricing up at nighttime and increased your margin from 14% to 18%. Did you start pricing up at daytime during the same time?
Yeah, that's part of the strategy.
Okay, so I should start pricing up during the day as well. Experiment with it.
What I think I'm a little behind, so my questions are kind of like a little interjecting on accident. But what types of items and what situations have you seen where like repricing at night or even in the middle of the day, what items have done well on that, and when does it just do nothing? You're just not making sales for 30 minutes. You come right back down.
When there's more than 4 or 5 FBA sellers, the pricing up strategy, just like you're not moving the market. When you're up against one or maybe 2 other FBA sellers, it's very tangible what you're doing. I've seen countless times where like they follow, say we like penny pinch on our way down, where it could be one of the situations where like speed matters, as some repricers do every 30 minutes, every 5 minutes. But then when you go back up, they join you, and then all of a sudden you're penny pinching down at a higher price point. So if you got a lot of competition, it's not going to do too much. But if you only have 1 or 2, like it does make a difference.
So if someone wants to price up to increase their profit margins, how high should they price items up? So their max price, should it be 1,000? Should it be a ridiculously high number? Should it be a realistic number? How much higher are you going when you price up?
Well, if you were selling a lot in 2020, pricing too high was a problem. A lot of accounts got suspended. Actually, we went through a suspension, and it was like arbitrary. Like what's funny is we got suspended on products that like we were only $1 or $2 above like an average selling price. Definitely not like price gouging or anything. It's just
they had to show the Supreme Court how many sellers they suspended, so they had to just get that number out there.
But still, they will deactivate offers if they are too high, and they just think it's so. We generally don't price things more than like 30-40% gross margin, which can be about double our floor price. If our break even is about $15, we generally don't go above 30. That's to kind of stop the Amazon robots from like hating on us. It's also we want to sell through. Cash flow is important, and so yeah.
Perfect. Real quick, Caleb, do you have any thoughts on pricing up for booksellers, and maybe Scott as well, if there's anything different when it comes to booksellers?
Yeah, so just from a 30,000 foot view, the reason we price up is, in general, if you have a repricer and you get into trouble two ways. One, you win the buy box, you reprice down to get the buy box. And let's say there's just two prime sellers that are within a range. So let's say the merchant fulfill price is 10 and you're at 15. If there's two sellers at 15, but it's a high velocity item that's selling often, you might be able to get 19 or 20 bucks for it. That might be a reasonable prime bump. Is, from 10 to 20, that might be fine. If you drop to 15 because another seller was at the buy box at 15 and you're trying to match or beat by a penny or whatever your strategy is, and one of you sells out, the other one of you that's left is still going to hold the buy box at that price. And depending on what your repricer does with that information, it's going to go, well, hey, I have the buy box, I'm just going to leave it here. When in reality, there's now no other prime competition. It's still selling quickly. And you could have priced up and Amazon would still award you the buy box, assuming the price falls within their range. So pricing up does two things. One, if there was competition and the other guy or gal sold out, it then puts you back at a reasonable bump to try and capture as much profit as you can. And the reason that's important is because there's a fairly high fixed cost on the FBA front. You're paying the FBA pick, pack, and ship fee. It's basically a weight and dimension based fee. And then you're paying the 15% Amazon fee plus, the $1.80 and everything else. So when you price up by $1, you're going to capture 85 cents of that dollar, and Amazon's only getting 15 cents of that. So once you cover your fixed costs of whatever the base Amazon fees are, every dollar you go up, you're winning 85% of that. So that's incredibly important, because that 85 cents, a lot of us will send books to Amazon that make 85 cents. So that's the equivalent of finding another profitable book and just squeezing that much out. So repricing up in the case where there's nobody else on it allows you to kind of capture more margin, assuming Amazon will award you the buy box and then kind of hold tight. And you don't want to just keep repricing up every night by $5, because at some point that $10 book, now you're priced at 30 or 40, and that's not really realistic to get that bump. So you do want to have some sort of a control to say only reprice up by so much. The other reason that helps is when there's one or two sellers competing and you bump back up, when they reprice, they're going to look for the lowest prime price, and assuming that they're not locked in at the buy box, they're going to try and come up as well. And so now you kind of reset that downward pressure, because what's happening is, you beat each other by a penny or a percent or whatever, and slowly work your way down. Now, this doesn't happen really quickly. I don't know what you see, Scott. We tend to see that if you beat somebody on price or match them, sometimes the buy box gets rotated. But in general, in the book world, it's awarded to one seller. And what happens is when you beat them by a penny, you typically hold that spot for 10 to 20 minutes, usually about 15 minutes. You win it. Even if somebody undercuts you right away, you're still kind of in that buy box spot. So after 15 minutes, they're going to undercut, their penny offer wins. Your repricer is going to notice that you didn't win it. And then about 15 minutes later, you're going to win the buy box again. So it's not as quick as I'm willing to sell, like setting the price at 20 and two people are repricing. It doesn't immediately just drop down to our floor. It's kind of a slow, staggered race to the bottom. And then by pricing up, ideally, it helps reset that pressure where you both come back up and you're kind of sharing the buy box on the way down again. Reprice up, it kind of relieves the pressure. And then what Scott said is if there's 5 or 6 prime sellers all fighting, if the fight's down here at 15 and you price back up to 20, you're really out of contention because they're not all going to join you. So sometimes it's important just to look at that and say, okay, I'm going to let these guys duke it out because the volume's so high, I can reasonably expect to get my $20 price point eventually. So that's kind of one of the proponents to my strategy of kind of set your price based on sales velocity and based on your desired prime margin, and just kind of set it, forget it, and let it come to you, versus raising up. So if you're going to play the automated game, I think it's very important to have a breathing session where you let the price go back up and see what happens to the market.
Yeah. This is really annoying to bring up, but the FBA fees are going up for this Q4. It's a temporary price increase. So, everyone needs to know their profit margins. Consider that like a technology hack if you know exactly what you're making and, situations that you're not. So you don't have any of those surprises.
Are you affected by restock limits at all? Like in 2020, were you?
Oh yeah, in 2021 it was huge.
Was that when it happened? What year?
It started in 2020, but 2021 was when they really went after pretty much everyone.
Yeah.
I know was affected. Even like the biggest sellers that used to have, could ship in 1 million units. For us, actually, we had about a capacity of about 1 million. They ratcheted down to 800, and we're like, okay, we could work with the 700. It's like, okay, this is getting a little bit painful. And then when they took us from 700,000 to like 600,000 units, and it's like, okay, like you have our attention, and we like wrote off inventory, and it was ugly.
Yeah, booksellers got completely screwed. I think a lot got screwed yesterday when they dropped restock limits again.
Really?
It's a lot different in the book world. I mean, like, I don't know. A lot of booksellers send in like a bunch of million-plus ranked books that are like $1 profit. And I don't know. I think if you didn't learn the first time restock limits happen, and Caleb talks about this a lot, like he's looked at people's inventory and he's found out that I'm going to screw these numbers up, but like an incredibly low percent. Like it's like, what's the number? Like what percent of their inventory sells for what percent of their profit? It was like 3 or 4% of their profit, but like 20% of their inventory was selling for 3% of the profit. Do you remember the numbers?
Well, it's the 80-20 rule on steroids, but in general,
yeah,
it
was 40%. I think it was 40% of the inventory sold was like only sold for a total of 3% of their profit. So what you were telling these bulk booksellers was like, hey, cut out that 40%, which would cut out a lot of their employees' work and everything, and you'll only suffer a 3% profit margin loss, which actually will increase their profit margins because they wouldn't have to pay the employees to sticker it with different SKU labels and ship it. I think that was the number.
Well, so actually, I just ran this again. Typically, it turns into like a 20-5 ratio. So we actually looked at a seller who's doing about 80 grand a month right now. So they're going to be approaching $1 million, all books and media. And 80% of their units were netting 95% of their dollars, meaning they could cut 20% of the units and only notice a 5% hit. So when you look at that on the low profit side of things, it helps you be a little more efficient. Now, the trick is it's not always easy to know which ones of those books are going to drop in value. But in general, 80-20 is a rule. 80% of your profit is going to come from 20% of your units. And then as you get into the long tail of that, it tends to be 20-5. That's just how the ratios tend to work.
Yeah,
so,
it'd be interesting to back it up and look at when they sent the inventory in, what price was it at, and if they could predict what inventory, if there's like a trend, like, oh, don't send inventory in like less than $12 or something like that.
Right. So one of the challenges and why booksellers get hurt with restock limits. Scott, what's your expected sell-through rate if you buy 1,000 units across a spectrum of products? What do you expect to sell through over 6 months to a year, or by the end of it?
We make most of our profits first 90 days. That's where everything's profitable. But by the end of a year, we've actually sold about 90 to 95% of that inventory. And we probably could even sell through more if we paid more attention to that stuff at the right season. There's a capacity issue there because and generally, if something's going to sell, like you have a chance to sell it during Christmas or something around there, as some products are seasonal. But the great thing is if you set your buying parameters right, you can sell through at least 95% of your inventory. Not all of that like very profitable, but I'd say 60-70% of that at your expected profit margin. Yeah,
that's incredible. So in Scott's business, there's a lot of efficiency. If you think of like a pipe and you're throwing a bunch of inventory into the pipe, most of it's going to flush out. 90 to 95% gets flushed out. 5 to 10% gets kind of stuck behind as calcified deposits. And he can go in and kind of remove some of that dead weight and be okay. In the book world, I typically only expect to sell about 80% of my inventory. So that's like best case. And again, I'm going to sell probably 50 to 60% of whatever I send in the first like 3 months. So a lot of that bump is going to happen early, but books are just longer tail in general, right? So I'm going to send in a lot of books that might sell 2 to 3 times a year. It's a portfolio play. I don't know which book is going to sell next. But if I sell even 5% of those a month, then it offsets all the carrying costs and the storage fees for the rest of that inventory bucket. So booksellers in general, if you don't go in and clean up your inventory, you're going to be stuck in a situation where you have 5,000 units and Amazon says, hey, you can only have 6,000 units because you're not selling that much and we need to protect our warehouse space and our labor. Then you're kind of stuck. In reality, you can probably weed out 1,000 to 2,000 units that have been sitting there for an extended period of time, 6 months plus, a year plus. Some people have never gone back. And so you've got inventory that's been just sitting there and you're like, maybe it'll sell. So it is important to go back through and make sure that if it hasn't sold, if you were wrong, if the price has dropped, if the e-score keeps dropping as well, it might be time to shed some of that dead weight and make room for inventory that's moving. If you run a lean operation and you're selling through a higher percentage of your inventory, then the restock limits aren't really going to impact you. And so merchant will fill long tail items. You can just be more cautious about what you send in. But in general, books are going to have a higher non-sell-through percentage, meaning you're going to have a lot of stagnant inventory. And Amazon doesn't like that. Restock limits are going to hurt. So we have a free tool. I'll just throw it out. Restock.thebookflipper.com. You can upload your inventory.
I was looking for that the other day. I'm so glad you said that. I was going to have my team go through and check that out before this, especially when restock limits hit.
Yeah, Scott's going to check it out. So restock.thebookflipper.com. It's built for media. Okay. It's kind of, you can categorize based on like books, CDs, DVDs, video games. But what it does is it allows you to pull your inventory health report, which is just your FBA inventory. And it's going to kind of show you a grid and you can pick how long has it been in inventory, what the sales rank is, and then what the lowest used prices are. And then you can kind of say, hey, here's a section of my inventory that's like, it's low price and high sales rank. I'm just going to cut this out. So it allows you to see a grid based on price and sales rank. And it kind of shows you which ones are the studs. They're high price, low rank. They're going to sell quickly. There's a lot of margin there. Which ones are your bread and butter? They're lower price, but they're still going to sell quickly. And then we call it the duds, which are high rank. They're not likely to sell and low profit. And then you have like your long tail, like lottery tickets that, they might sell, but they also have a lot of meat on the bone. So that will help you clear some of your inventory. You can run that for free. I think there's a way to tip our team if you want to throw some coffee or something our way, but it's yours. Please make yourself available and use
Scott's low on cash.
That will
spend it all in inventory.
There's actually a question here for Warner, Field to Profit. I want to get him involved in the discussion about the conditional repricing strategy on BQool. Do you use BQool?
Yeah, I do right now. I'm sure it's, like you said, it's probably the exact same thing as everything else. It just is what we are used to using. The conditional stuff is fairly new. Probably what he's talking about. We can do a conditional rule based on kind of similar. You're talking about like that 90-day rule. I'm curious kind of what your process in that 90 days looks like. But for us, after we get beyond that 90-day period, we throw on one of those conditional rules. And every 30 days, sometimes it's every 60 days, it's going to automatically cut our minimum ROI, get more aggressive with that repricing rule. We're going to have those different, more aggressive rules. And so after it gets old, that rule kind of picks up a lot of the trash for us and just does and gets rid of it at the best price it possibly can. Obviously, we'll go in and manually review a lot of that. But that's a lot of where we're using that. There's also some cases with that conditional where you can base it off of sell-through rate. I found that to be better when you're really deep in stock on something. So like if you got 1,000 units, you sell through a bunch of it, you want to kind of get a little more aggressive towards your profit there. And vice versa. If you're not selling any of it, you're bought super deep, it'll automatically start adjusting that. That's kind of the two cases I've used for those conditional rules. But I was also going to ask you this question because that 90-day rule is interesting. I've kind of found the same thing. Anytime I go in and reprice inventory and it's like 100 days old, it's like, oh, I'm losing money on this. I don't even have to look at the chart to know. What does your process in that 90 days? Like how often are you repricing? Yeah. Are you manually reviewing some of those things during that?
Well, that's cool that BQool has that. That's what you described is very similar to what we do. We do chop up the 90 days. We actually the first 3 days, and then we look at the first 10 days, 15. And if it's selling through, we don't touch it. We don't touch our minimums. Like we want to make our minimums are 17, 18% gross margin. But if it doesn't, then we'll go down to 14% or 10%. So it's like a slow decay. And then actually the 45 to 90 day window, I think we just leave it at about 5% as our minimum if it's not selling. If it's selling, remember, like we never touched it in the beginning. It's just like, you know, we always are looking at our days of cover. You know, is this going to stock out in the next 70 days, 40 days, 15 days? And we kind of make the calculations based off of that. And it sounds like Be Cool can do a lot of that.
Why are you going by margin and not by ROI or just profit?
Oh, I have lost so much. I've hated that conversation internally. You know, I go by gross margin because the retail world, that's what they talk about. And I'm like, no, it's ROI. Internally, I was like, our systems are doing ROI. I don't care what you guys say. It's a subtle difference, but it actually skews it a little bit differently towards different products. And so when you make purchasing decisions across 1,000 products, maybe 5% of them, the difference of GM calculations and ROI will move the needle. And so we do ROI. It's just, you know.
Oh, you do ROI?
Yeah. We do.
Oh, okay. I thought you said gross margin.
When we're talking with our retail partners, like wholesale, the suppliers, we talk gross margin with them.
Okay, gotcha. Okay,
Caleb,
I have a quick little story, and then I would like. Go ahead.
There it is. Yeah. Real quick,
go ahead,
I was curious if you look at margin or ROI more, Caleb. I feel like margin would make more sense for books.
We look at both, but essentially I treat, because I'm not usually doing I do some online arbitrage where I'm spending higher dollars, but in general, like most of my business now is consignment. So my cost is essentially nothing. I've got shipping on it, but it's basically a very low fixed cost. And it's less about what I have into the book and more about what the market will bear in terms of extracting those dollars back from Amazon. So that's more what I look at is what is Amazon going to give me if this book sells for $8, $10, $12, etc. And that's kind of how I make the decisions. In terms of bringing it in, it's basically if e-score is high, if sales velocity is high, I'm okay with a smaller percentage. And I'm mostly looking at like I'm okay with getting $1 back from Amazon after all is said and done. So I'm mostly looking at what's going to be left over after Amazon fees than I am in terms of my buy cost into it.
So Warner has to talk like 30 seconds before to like plan his interruption. It's kind of like Miles on his lives. Miles just interrupts people. Miles will answer questions on his live and just like completely ignore like the actual people on his live stream. It's hilarious. I'm not gonna do that today. So my quick little story, and then I have a question about the speed of repricers. Is I noticed when I changed to ChannelMax. I'm not like plugging ChannelMax or anything. This is just my experience. So I went from Reprice it to Aura, and I noticed a little bit of an increase. But whenever you change your repricing rules, I've noticed whether you do it conservatively or aggressively, I've noticed whenever you change them, usually you have like a next day or two of better sales, just because your strategy is a little bit different. But what happened was I changed my strategy to ChannelMax, and I didn't really change much. I started repricing up at night, and then I just matched buy box. And then I did set like an aggressive rule for anything that was like over 180 days old, I think, for books. We would undercut buy box, or we would price down until we won buy box. And that skyrocketed my units sold for 2 days in a row. And I was like, holy shit. And then I noticed I was selling a lot of books at a loss. So then I raised my minimum price to $10, and it's actually crazy, like what happened. I made it my profile picture for a while, and I didn't really talk about it. So if you guys saw my profile picture on Instagram, my sales literally went from like 70 units sold a day on this account to 120 units sold a day, and that average just maintained. It was just like a flat average. So like something changed significantly. I raised my minimum price. I changed my repricer from Aura to ChannelMax, and my repricing strategy was more or less the same other than pricing up at night. So the only thing I'm really thinking that was different, Scott, you mentioned this in the YouTube video where you do talk about ChannelMax is much faster than a lot of repricers in the market. And I'm wondering if that had an effect on it, or what specifically happened there. Why am I selling so many more units?
It's hard to. I mean, it could be a variety of factors. I have to like really dive in
Yeah.
to get some understanding. But you could have hit a threshold where Amazon, started to reward your account a little bit more. Um, I remember it was like, what is it, July 1st or July 5th, 2020, when they made an algorithm change. Um, it helped us out. And I can't, take credit for anything, but, Amazon makes adjustments, and one of those could have just benefited you.
Okay. A more specific question: how important is the speed of a repricer for just overall sell through?
Sounds like for books, like not hardly at all.
That's a weird thing, though. I just feel like something. I feel
Well,
like the speed was the thing that
the
helped it,
thing
but
is,
maybe it didn't.
the books category is kind of like you've got your FBA booksellers, and then you've got your FBM, like people that are selling something at a penny.
Mm-hmm.
They're just playing different games, and so those ones are probably maybe very reactive. For us, we really want to be reactive because we're up against big sellers, we're up against Amazon, and we want to make quick decisions. Like if we do these like yo-yo strategies where we price down and we price up, we want to, we want to react within minutes. And I do believe there's a theoretical maximum. I don't think sellers can reprice quicker than every 2 minutes. That's the number of like feeds that you can submit. But most repricers, I haven't seen anyone that does it like, a single SKU can't reprice like more than every 5 minutes. I don't see that happen that often. Every 30 minutes is fine. I've had that for a long time. It just depends the type of competition that you're up against, and how you're going to achieve your sales. Faster is better, but I would actually say good strategy is better than fast.
Okay. I have a question for Warner, and you kind of touched on this a little bit with conditional pricing, but what are you doing, Warner, and what are you telling your students to do? And I'm sure you'll have a question for Scott as well. I think you actually told me the question specifically about this. For your min and max prices, like, are you manually changing them? Do you have like a spreadsheet where you just enter a formula? We're going 10% lower after 50 days. What does your min and max strategy look like? And then Scott, if you want to think about that as well, I'm sure you already know your answer, but that's something I'm struggling with right now in my business.
Yeah, so it's interesting that Scott's basing it all on margin. I imagine that's a lot more scalable. I imagine that's the reason you're doing that, because I still manually reprice everything myself, which is something which was kind of tying into my question that I wanted to talk about also. But so I go in and I look at those Keepa charts. I figure out like that reasonable range where I want it to sell. I'll write down the price, especially if I'm buying deep on something. I'll record kind of the min and max I wanted to set before I buy it, so I'm not, staying attached, getting emotional with my repricing decisions. Generally, it'll be a lot lower ROI if it's higher volume, and vice versa. Just got to make that risk reward worth it. For the most part, I'm throwing everything on an AI rule with Be Cool. There's a couple different ones that I'll cycle between, depending on sell through, that kind of stuff. We'll start everything on just the basic AI, let it reprice up at night, see how it behaves. And then I have been building a custom spreadsheet. I can download my report, plug everything in there, and then it's going to spit out a bunch of lists. I'm kind of like, I'm working on, it's kind of my project right now. It gives me a score based on how urgent it is to reprice it. So, more in stock, less days in sales. You're really close to being at the min price. So it just kind of calls my attention to where I want to go in and reprice. And then according to that, I'll go in and adjust mins fairly often. Sometimes we'll change repricing rules, but we're changing mins a lot more than we're changing those rules. That's pretty much what we're doing at the moment. So I'm realizing that that's not scalable. Like, as we're adding more ASINs, we're coming up to several hundred. I'm trying to work even less. My goal is to work like 30 minutes or an hour a day on the Amazon business. So I'm trying to figure out how to get rid of that. So kind of my question for you, Scott, is I assume you have a repricing team. Like what did you kind of teach them? Like how are they basing their decisions when they first set things? How do they know when to change prices? I know that's a really advanced thing. You kind of want to just give us like a bird's eye view.
We never really had a repricing team. I do have some VAs that look at our problem SKUs, but from the beginning, we've always leveraged a repricer and rules that apply, that just kind of like apply to the different sections of products, like your old stuff, your new stuff. And it's, you'd look at a spreadsheet and it'd just be like, pretty much just different formulas, not complicated, just like, expected percents. And yeah, I think, it's something that you should iterate on. And if it's your account, someone has to be like the expert and like watch webinars just like this to get a few extra ideas and then, apply it and then go back and listen and then like talk to other people. It's a work in progress for everyone.
Sweet. Does anyone?
Cool. So basically,
go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry. So your rules are just kind of, you iterated on them so many times that they just kind of catch a lot of the stuff, and then you've got that VA team that just kind of catches the problems that slip through.
Yeah.
Huh.
Cool.
That's awesome.
Okay. So does anyone have to run right at the hour at 12? Anyone got to get out of here?
Nope.
Yeah.
Okay, Scott. Yeah, I figured you had your calendar hour increments. So let's talk about this last one. This is actually my last question because you answered another question of mine just then. So Caleb, you want to talk a little bit about historical data and using it for seasonal products, textbooks. I was going to use historical data for textbooks, but I have a new strategy where I'm just trying to sell as many as possible, so I'm not really leveraging historical data. And then, Scott, if you want to comment on that as well, if you've ever experimented with historical data. So, Caleb, I know you've done a lot of thinking on this.
We've done a lot of thinking. We haven't implemented as much, but again, it's the one-off rule. If you have one copy of a textbook, and right now we're in textbook season, so it's different. Let's pretend we're in November, and we know the textbook season's coming up late December in January. If that book today is 30, but historical data shows it likely to spike up to 80, then are you willing to wait 60 days to probably get a much higher price? And the answer is probably yes. So it's more about looking at historical data and saying if a book generally fluctuates between $30 and $80, we probably don't want to sell it when it's closer to the $30 range unless price is dropping out and there's no chance that it's recovering, which sometimes is hard to tell. Versus books that have historical, some books show seasonality around Q4 with Christmas. Some are gonna show it around like a textbook season. Some are like seasonal. So if you're looking at gardening books, those are going to be hotter in the spring and the summer, of course, than they are going to be in the winter. So if you can detect seasonality and the price is high enough, sometimes it makes sense to sit and wait. I don't know anything that does that on the market currently. So it's a cool theory. And I know people that'll protect and they'll actually, I used to do this. I'd mark anything that showed seasonality with like a textbook, TXTBK as like the first part of the SKU. So I could search that on Amazon and then sort of make decisions based on those and go back in and reprice more aggressively manually during textbook season. So there's things you can do to do it. It'd be really cool if the software had, some sort of machine learning built into it to actually look at that and detect, are we on the low end of a price that's likely to fluctuate? If so, price conservatively, let it breathe, let it go back up. If we're on the high end of that, then it's not likely to go any higher, and we should price as aggressively as possible to try and squeeze that out now before the price is likely to kind of fluctuate. So it's a different game when you're talking about dozens or hundreds of the same SKU because you're still trying to balance that out. But when you have one-offs and you have some seasonal data, then you can maybe make better decisions.
So I probably spent 2 months of my life building a tool that looked at our competition's inventory levels and actually looking at day by day, like say they have 20 units, then the next day they have 18, then 16, and then looking at their stock out and predicting a stock out. You can find some really interesting things. There was a lot of challenges. One, it's really hard to create that reliable of a tool. You got to do a lot of scraping. You got to get around Amazon's bots. You got to what happens if they replenish their inventory, all sorts of things. I had way more success if I just looked at our sell-through, ignored all the other sellers, be like, okay, are we selling at this price? Are we selling well? If so, that's a condition to raise a price. If we're not selling, that's a condition to lower. And then kind of our stock out, like, are we selling out? And like, it doesn't really matter if there's other sellers. They'll likely stock out too, but if we're stocking out, we're just going to raise our prices. And so way more success just looking at our sell-through because like we just know that data and we have it hard, and we're not basing it off of conditions that may or may not, be reality. Who knows if like another seller with 500 units doesn't come in. So it's much easier to build a system just looking at your own inventory.
I would echo
that. Are you
that
holding
same
out
thing.
at all in any? Go ahead, Caleb.
I would echo the same thing. I think ultimately it's results driven. So we could argue till we're blue in the face on what the right, best, most efficient pricing strategy is. But at the end of the day, I'll go back to my initial disclaimer, is are you getting an adequate sell-through rate, and is your ASP, your average selling price, good enough that you are generating a profit? If a regular bookseller sent in a standard distribution of books and sold 90% of them in the first 30 days, you certainly left money on the table. You sold them too quickly. You could do that by lowering price across the board. If you drop your prices to a penny, you're going to sell them all, right? That's not a good thing. So you want to, it's not just sell through and it's not just average selling price. Those two things have to be balanced. And as long as you have your internal benchmarks and talking to other sellers and realizing what's normal and what's possible, if you can adjust your strategies and then look at those two data points and see how they yin and yang, if you can do that appropriately, that will kind of give you the guidance to keep tweaking your repricing.
100%. We'll let you go in just 1 second, Scott. I got one more question for you, and then Caleb and Fields of Profit and we can all answer a few questions and then get out of here. Are you doing anything like Caleb mentioned about like the TXT prefix or any type of indicator in the SKU where like maybe during Q4, every year this product goes out of stock? Are you doing any type of specific pricing based on the category or some type of SKU indicator?
We do have a view that we've kind of created in our inventory that just shows our fastest selling products. We are big into Halloween, a lot of Halloween costumes, and it's a really fun category to like, it's just a fun category because stuff you see. And then like when stuff just like goes off, like you see stock out, these people are less sophisticated than like Christmas. Like there's more people in the Christmas space, fewer people in the Halloween. And so what we did is we created a window that just shows like the last 24 hours of sales and kind of a more hyperactive view of like what's really going on. And then right there, I put a button that allowed me to like create a temporary price lift, and so it was a fun way to be a little bit more greedy on seasonal stuff. And it's actually just fun. It's fun to like watch where your successes are, or like where their revenue is moving, and like being able to do that. So that's what we have in our seasonal stuff.
100%. We'll let you get out of here. If you guys want to follow Scott Needham, his YouTube is below. Make sure to follow the right YouTube. He's got 2 YouTube accounts, so don't go looking for that other one. And thanks for coming on, man. And hopefully we'll see you at
Thank
Miami
you guys.
2023.
It was great to be here.
Thanks, Scott.
100%. Yeah. If anyone in the comment section, I got to move over a little bit. Anyone has questions, go ahead and ask them. Warner and Caleb and I will go ahead and answer a few of these. We'll keep this running for about 10, 15 minutes and get out of here. Does that sound good, guys?
Yep.
Sweet. All right.
Yeah.
We got Boss Lady. She's a big Caleb fan. Yeah, Caleb, we probably have a lot of people that want to know more about restock limits. We didn't talk too much about that. We had one person in here ask a question. Let's see what they said. I've reached my restock limit. What should I do? You've kind of already touched on that. Go to restock.thebookflipper.com. That link is below. overall strategies people should be using this Q4 for restock limits?
You can certainly like adjust your repricing and be more aggressive, meaning you want to sell more. However, that's like that the problem's already there. It's kind of you're going to be chasing your tail a bit. So the restock limits about a year ago was, we tried to figure out what was the defining moment. Was it IPI? Was it sell through? Was it feedback? Was it number of like basically it came down to sell through. That was probably the most defining aspect. And so last year it was basically 3 months of sell through. So if you were selling 1,000 books a month, they would essentially say we're gonna allow you to have 3,000 units of inventory. So if you end up with that pipe analogy again, where you have a lot of just old, dated calcium deposits in your pipe that are holding things back, then you're going to be in a rough spot because you're kind of holding those 3,000. Let's say you have 1,000 units in stock and you're only, let's say you have 2,000, you're selling 1,000 a month. So you're selling 50%, which is really, really high for booksellers. That person is going to be okay because they're going to be able to have an inventory limit of 3,000 and they're going to be able to keep sending books in. Versus a seller that has 5,000 units in stock and is only selling 1,000, their restock limit's probably going to be 3,000. They're going to not be able to send in more inventory. So you can try and increase your sell through, but the reality is you need to look at your inventory and how old it is, because if you have inventory that's a year old, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years old that hasn't sold yet and is just sitting there, you're going to sell a very low percentage of that inventory. And that's never going to let you get ahead of the game, because right now it's a 4-month lead time. So if you're selling 1,000 units a month, your restock limits are probably close-ish to 4,000. And that could change again as we get closer to Q4. So Amazon may drop that back down to 3 months. And if you were just barely catching the 4-month rule, you're going to be in trouble. So it's two things. One, you do need to look at your sell-through and your repricing strategies. But most importantly, you need right now get in there and remove slow-moving inventory to make room for this.
Yeah, based on that rule you talked about, kind of the 3-month sale rule, I've actually had a little bit of success if your storage limits are lower than that 3-month storage. That metric they're going off of. If you send them a message through seller support, a rare case of them actually being helpful, they did boost my restock limits one time. Naturally, most of the time they're going to tell you no, but they will boost it every now and then if you're below that.
They did this time around or last year?
They've done it. It was last year. I do it every now and then still too. I don't run into it as much. Obviously, I'm not doing books like I used to. Like I think I could send in 10 times what I have right now and still not hit my limit. But when I had a lot more books, I sent a message saying, hey, last 90 days I've sold blah, blah, blah. Right now I've got this in storage, and they boosted it by a little bit. So if any of you guys, if you're below that metric, send them a message. The worst I can do is tell you no.
Love it.
All right. I mean, I think that's it for questions. I got all my questions out of the way. Warner, do you have any more questions for Caleb? Or I mean, Scott's gone, so.
Yeah, I think we're good. It's a lot of value. Those who
Awesome.
who've got the systems in place to be able to make a lot more money.
Hopefully my background noise wasn't too bad. Somebody just commented about that. But yeah, I appreciate you guys coming on. We'll make a lot of this content on Instagram over the next few days. I think the restock limit conversation will do well. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. So thank you guys.
You betcha. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. Yeah, if you guys want to see more, I believe all three of these guys are going to be coming to Miami 2023. So if you guys want, go to romer.biz. Link is below. You guys will get notifications for emails like this, for videos like this, and also about my events, just tips for selling on Amazon in general. That's romer.biz. That link is below. Don't forget to go follow these two guys. Where are they at? Right here. Don't forget to follow them. We'll link both their YouTube channels below. And yeah, much love. Thanks for coming on, guys.